Good morning, brothers and sisters, friends, and honored guests. My name is Laurie Mayhew. I'm the president of the New Westminster and District Labour Council and a member of COPE Local 378. Thank you for coming here today to remember, honor, and pay tribute to working people who have lost their lives and to recognize those whose lives are changed permanently because of a workplace injury or disease. This year's event is sponsored by the Canadian Labour Congress, BC Federation of Labour, Vancouver and District Labour Council, New Westminster and District Labour Council, and hosted by the City of New Westminster. And since we're not rushing back to work today, our New Westminster firefighter brothers are hosting lunch for us, an opportunity to share some food and conversation following the ceremony. We also give thanks to the New Westminster firefighter members who serve as honor guards today, brothers Tom Schneider, Dale Rutledge, and Shane Poole. And our sincere thanks to Brother David Irvine, member of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Burnaby Civic Workers Local, who agreed to be our piper for the ceremony today. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge some of our local politicians and labor leaders that are with us today, and before I start naming names, I'm going to apologize if I miss anybody off the list. There are quite a number of people here today. I'd like to start with Adrian Dix, leader of the BC NDP. We have Kathy Corrigan, MLA for Burnaby-Deer Lake, Harry Baines, MLA Surrey Newton, Raj Chauhan, MLA Burnaby Edmonds, Don Black, MLA New Westminster, Diane Thorne, MLA Coquitlam Millardville, Michelle Mongal, MLA Nelson Creston, and Chuck Puckmeyer from the New Westminster City Council, Bill Harper from the New West City Council, Colleen Jordan from Burnaby City Council, and we have MPs Finn Donnelly, Peter Julian, and Kennedy Stewart. Thank you all for coming today. And Bruce Ralston, Surrey Wally, and Mabel Elmore from Vancouver, Kensington. Thank you very much. And we have Judy Darcy, who's a candidate in the next provincial election for here in New Westminster. So April 28th is the National Day of Mourning for workers killed and injured on the job. This is a time for us to pay our respects to the families who have lost a loved one, to acknowledge the effect of workplace injury or disease on people and their families, to recommit ourselves to making health and safety a priority in our lives. The labor movement plays an instrumental role in raising the alarm over injustice within the compensation system, and we are leaders in promoting education, enforcement measures, and lobby for regulatory change. April 28th was chosen as the Day of Mourning for workers killed and injured on the job because it was on this day in 1914 that Ontario passed the first Comprehensive Workers' Compensation Act. The day was first proclaimed by the Canadian Labour Congress in 1984, and the Government of Canada made April 28th the official National Day of Recognition, declaring April 28th the Workers' Mourning Day Act in 1991. Each year, the New Westminster and District Labour Council presents to City Councils in our regional communities to educate, raise awareness on health and safety issues, and to seek their support and leadership on current issues. On behalf of the New Westminster and District Labour Council, I want to acknowledge the support from the City of New Westminster and the support of the current Mayor and Council in supporting our efforts. And I would like to welcome Mayor Wayne Wright of New Westminster to the podium.
Well, thank you very much. I bring you greetings from the citizens of New Westminster, as well as the other people that you see here that represent us so well, from our fire department and from my colleagues on the council. 10 years ago, I stood here with you, and this is the second time, and we not only give you a hearty welcome, but we give you our condolences for what's occurred, what is occurring, but we also give you our support to change it in the future. It's really an unbelievable thing that our armed forces that serve overseas have lost almost the same amount of people that we lose in 1 year. So it means that there's things to be done, places to go, people to see, and making some differences so we can stop what's going on. Our heartfelt sorrow goes out to those people in Fort George, or Prince George. I know my colleagues there are feeling the same. We have to give them our support now. thank you for being here today, and we should be working together to change some of the things that need changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next speaker is a woman named Renee Saklakar. She is both a poet and a writer. She has long-time activist roots here in New Westminster, along with her family. She's been involved in many issues over the years, and my notes say she's had an interesting career. And she comes today to share with us one of the poems she has written in honor of farm workers, an issue with which she has great passion. And so, Renee.
Oh, my beloved brothers and sisters, I can't tell you how honored I am to be able to read a poem that's appearing right now in a little magazine, a really little magazine called Rice Paper. And my beloved hometown, thank you, Mayor, for those wonderful words. This is a poem I wrote in 2010 after my husband took me out to a memorial in Abbotsford, and I didn't really know what it was going to be like, and I was very, very moved. And it was written originally in honor of the farm workers, but I dedicate it to all of you today, and especially to our brothers and sisters up in Prince George. The next growing season, a glossary. Dimension, March 2007. Sound, Trans-Canada Highway. Story, Abbotsford. Context, farming. Vehicle, baggy pants, tunics, scarves. Sound, churches, gurdwaras. Materials, tractor, transmitters, sirens. Story, Amarjeet Kaur Baal, 52. Exhibit, killed, valley, corn, cabbage heads, water. Story, Sarjeet Kaur Sidhu, 31. Exhibit, killed, transaction, farm worker, choice, organic, materials, local, field, agrochemicals. Story, Abbotsford. Story, Sukhwinder Kaur Punya, 46. Exhibit, killed, sound, Trans-Canada Highway, materials, seatbelts, unauthorized interjection, March 1914. Echo, we want no interference with our laboring classes, the Vancouver Sun. Material, farmer, dimension, March 2010. Sound, ceremony, sadness, cherry blossoms. Valley, Amarjeet, Sarjeet, Sukhwinder. Broadcast, the correct pronunciation, Abbotsford, not Abbotsford. Field, mother, daughter, auntie. Sound, grandfather, daughter, cousin. Objects, 3 photographs, 1 memorial. Subjects, their story, your story, your story. Time and its dimensions.
Thank you, Renee. That was very powerful. Our next speaker is Brother Ken Giorgetti, President of the CLC. Shaping a national agenda for working people and bringing those programs and activities to the local level is the work of the Canadian Labour Congress. Traveling extensively across this country and internationally representing the Canadian Labour Congress is one of BC's best-known leaders and a brother from the United Steelworkers Union, Brother Ken Giorgetti.
Thank you. Since 1986 that I've had the opportunity to speak on behalf of working people, 31,000 workers have recorded deaths due to industrial accidents and disease. 31,000 in the 26 years since I stood in front of the BC Fed and took my oath of office to work to help to prevent these diseases and industrial accidents. And besides having in common workers who didn't come home after going to work that day, they had something else in common. Every one of those deaths was preventable. Every one of those diseases, from exposure to asbestos and carcinogens, was preventable. The tragic, horrific accident that just happened in Prince George the other day, where 2 workers died and 20 remain in the hospital, was preventable. And it took 2 explosions for this government and this compensation board to act. And that's the tragedy that we mourn today, is that people have to die before other people act on their behalf. When will it stop? And what will it take to stop it is the question. Today's the 20th anniversary where we left 29 miners below ground in a preventable accident in Westray. And we got legislation that said when there is culpability that causes a worker's death, that those employers should be prosecuted under our criminal code. Yet today, not one employer for anything, including exposing workers to asbestos knowingly, has caused a person or an employer to be prosecuted. That's a crime in and of itself. We have to act on this, and we have to be out front and put a face on this issue. People shouldn't have to die trying to support themselves and their families, yet today they still do, and every one of them is preventable. So I thank all of you for coming out and focusing on this issue today, that we do need to mourn for those who lost their lives trying to make a living. But help me and help the rest of us tomorrow in speaking out and acting on this issue, demanding better health and safety laws, demanding that the people we elect to represent us, to put a conscience on those corporations, act on our behalf. Today, let's mourn. Let's feel bad. But tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, let's act on these things and not forget about those who had to lose their lives trying to earn a living. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Our next speaker is both an activist and a feminist. Sister Joey Hartman has worked extensively in her community, her union, and internationally to make the world a better place for working people. She's a member of the Communications, Energies, and Paperworkers Union, and worked for the Hospital Employees Union representing healthcare workers for many years. Most recently, Sister Hartman was elected as the first woman after 110 years as the full-time officer and president of the Vancouver and District Labour Council. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce my sister, Joey Hartman.
Thank you for that kind introduction. As of a couple of weeks ago, a teenager in British Columbia can now work alone on a graveyard shift, alone in a convenience store overnight. It's no longer a requirement to have a second worker or to have a barrier to protect them from what might come. The money is protected, the lottery tickets are protected, the worker is not. And that's because Max and other stores like it, retailers who have 24-hour operations, were successful in their lobby to have Grant's Law watered down recently as a cost-saving measure. So it's coming down to profit over safety, and it puts already vulnerable workers in an even more precarious position. We know that employers routinely violate the existing regulations that are in place, and apparently the possibility of fines is not a deterrent to them. In 2011, employers were fined $4.9 million by WorkSafe for repeated and serious violations of the existing regulations. Watering those down now is not the right way to go. That was a 55% increase over the previous year. So the fines were over doubled because employers were being so flagrant in their abuses of the regulations and their workers. So would prison terms be a bigger disincentive? As Ken was saying, the provinces are reluctant to act on the legislation when the criminal code was changed to allow for it. And we also see that probably isn't as much of a deterrent as we would like. You've likely seen the posters, kill a worker, go to jail. But again, the provinces seem unwilling to act on the laws that are available to them. In a high-profile case just last year, a contractor who specialized in asbestos removal, his name was Arthur Moore, he was sentenced to 60 days in jail. Not for the act of repeatedly sending young workers, some as young as 14, into houses to take down the walls and not warning them or telling them anything about what they were being exposed to, which could very likely result in some of those young workers developing asbestosis not so far into their lives. He didn't tell them that. He was not convicted for having not followed the regulations. It was a contempt of court for having refused the desist orders. And while fines and criminal prosecution are important, they only come after a worker has been killed, injured, or developed a disease. They don't save workers, they don't prevent. So it's better to start at the root causes. It's better to strengthen and enforce the regulations, to increase mandatory training, to shore up the authority of the workplace committees that are in place, and other measures that will emphasize prevention and getting out ahead of these problems. Because, as we all know, these opportunities do exist, and we know that every disease, every workplace injury, every workplace death is in fact preventable. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. Our next speaker will bring a bit of reality to the reason we're here today. Sister Trudy Spiller lost both her husband a few years ago in a workplace accident and her brother this year in a tragic workplace accident. We thank her for coming today, and we thank her for her courage to speak after such a loss. Please welcome Sister Trudy Spiller.
Thank you, BC Federation of Labour, for inviting me to share my story for my family members that have been killed on the job. My husband, Terry Erickson, was killed in a logging accident June 7th, 1982 in Beaver Cove on the north end of Vancouver Island. My brother, Arthur Loring, killed in a logging accident January 30th, 2012 out of Terrace. Both were falling subcontractors. In 1982, our children, Jeremy and Vince, were 7 and 5 years old. I remember going to get counseling for my sons and having to pay $120 an hour. As a single parent, this was unaffordable, so we didn't get many counseling sessions. For many years, my sons' lives were spent in drug and alcohol addictions, unable to cope. I became an alcoholic for a few years and worked as a licensed practical nurse. Then we moved back to my hometown in Hazelton with family and turned my life around. January 30th, 2012, my brother Arthur subcontracted from Longshot Holdings Limited, and his crew consisted of himself and his son, Falling, a grapple skidder operator and a juicer operator. They were working 60 kilometers up the Copper Forest River Road east of Terrace. His son Ben didn't hear, Arthur saw, and he didn't answer on the radio, so he went to investigate. Ben found Arthur under a tree with his snowshoe sticking out of the snow, with the tree back across them. Ben cut the tree off his dad and began doing CPR, but my brother was already turning blue. Ben was unsuccessful with CPR, so he called the juicer operator, Terry Ellis, who in turn called 911. Ben remained with his dad for 3 hours until the ambulance arrived. What is most disturbing is that Ben drove himself all the way to Kitwanga to tell his brother Jason, and they went together to tell their mother Matilda. Arthur was a father to Melanie and then to Jason, Kevin, and Ben. Since the accident, WorkSafe BC has provided counseling for Ben once a week. Arthur was the wing chief of the Eagle Clan in Kitwanga. He was well known around the world as defending our land and asserting our rights and connections to the land. In 1992, Nettie Wild directed and produced the film Blockade, where Arthur was standing up for Aboriginal land claims that were not yet settled with the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en. He was blockading men he had worked with, but he was determined to bring the federal and provincial governments Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en to the table to negotiate a long overdue land claim. Arthur and Lesgeek members were in a standoff with the BC government over title, land and resources of almost 57,000 square kilometers in northern British Columbia. This film documents how Arthur blockaded logging crews from cutting trees on the Eagles' traditional lands, and later blockaded the Canadian National Railway, halting all shipments of coal, grain, and lumber to the coast. My brother was not afraid of being jailed for what he stood for and believed in. Arthur was a board of director for Forest Futures. This was Dogwood Initiative's original name. In 1992, Arthur and some Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en chiefs and wing chiefs joined Paul Watson on Sea Shepherd 2 to chase the Christopher Columbus replicas through Puerto Rico into international waters. Christopher Columbus' great-great-great-grandson was showcasing to the world 500 years of Christopher Columbus discovering North America. It was Sea Shepherd's mission to get an apology from Spain that Christopher Columbus did not discover North America. It was already discovered. It was Arthur that jumped aboard the replica Santa Maria and demanded an apology. The Spanish consulate signed an apology. In January 1994, Arthur and Nettie went to Chiapas, Mexico, to show blockade to the guerrillas who started a revolution and seized 5 towns and 500 farms at the beginning of the free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Nettie and Arthur went to show the Chiapan people not to ever give up what rightfully belongs to them. To this day, the 5 towns have been given back, but not the 500 farms. Arthur is well known to our people as a cultural leader, teacher, provider, visionary, businessman, environmentalist, and social activist. He dedicated his entire life to helping others. Arthur always made sure that elders and especially single women, single mothers were provided for. Arthur opposed the Enbridge pipeline and spoke out against it locally, nationally, and internationally. Since my husband's death in 1982, some improvements have been made to the forest practices and regulations, but certainly not enough. These 2 men had much to contribute to society. There's a reason it's not coming together apart. I would like to acknowledge my son, Vince, who was 5 years old when his father was killed, and his son, Terrence, who is now 5 years old. Vince was that old when his father was killed. I want to also thank my daughter, Tanisha, for being here to support me and other family members and friends during this most difficult time. Thank you especially to Brother Sinclair and the BC Federation of Labour and the Canadian Labour Congress for helping to keep British Columbia safer and acknowledging workers that have been killed or injured on the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Trudy. Our next speaker is Brother Mike Davis, who lost his father, Donald Davis, in the 1981 tragedy that killed 4 construction workers during the construction of the Bentall Towers. Thank you, Brother Davis, for coming today to share your story. So please welcome Mike Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, truly, for everyone that came out. This is important. On the way in today, I take the ferry, I picked up a paper. I normally don't read it. And on the front cover of The Sun was a young guy named Luca, and it says in quotes, "In 20 years, we'll be the face of our workforce." And right next to it was an article about the sawmill explosions. It got me thinking, what are we setting our future generations up for? Why can't we learn from our past? We're failing in protecting our most precious resource, our workers. The Workers' Compensation Board, now called WorkSafe BC. The title removes the word worker, and it's quite telling. It shows a lack of respect and less focus on protecting workers. Also, WorkSafe BC is not here on the weekend. They had their ceremony yesterday. Today is April 28th, the day of mourning, not yesterday. Maybe we should call it what it really has become, NICE, Negligence Insurance Corporation for Employers. No employers have ever been charged, yet mines, mills, logging companies, construction companies continue to allow workers to die. The pain, anger, and resentment I have now is less to do with losing my dad when I was 13 and more to do with the injustice that our family experienced. There were so many cover-ups and deceit, so the truth never saw the light of day. I still don't know exactly what happened the day my dad never came home. It's so important to remember the ultimate sacrifices that workers give when they lose their lives at work. On January 7th, 81, I remember I was sleeping on the couch and my dad was getting ready for work. And I just, hey, see you, Dad. I didn't think for a moment that he wasn't coming home that night. I was only 13. I have a younger brother and sister. None of us deserve that. My mom's here now. She didn't deserve that. But some of the things I miss, playing soccer, my dad on the sidelines cheering me on. Way to go, Mike. He'd come home in his work clothes. And he'd drop his lunchbox or his toolbox and he'd shoot some hoops with me on the driveway. That all ended. Didn't have that anymore. Never had a chance to ask his advice on life decisions or to introduce him to my boys. They deserve to meet their grandfather, and I deserve to have a dad longer than I did. I still miss him very much. And he wasn't able to come home because of a preventable workplace accident. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It's very powerful words from our two family members who have spoken today. Our next speaker, Sister Irene Lanzinger, has been a teacher since 1978, teaching both in Japan and Saudi Arabia, serving as the Vice President and then President of the BC Teachers Federation, and elected as Secretary-Treasurer of the BC Federation of Labour in 2010. Leading on the issues of provincial workplace health and safety, the Federation in the last year has been outspoken on behalf of workers in tree planting, farm workers, construction workers, asbestos exposure, child labor laws, and the stripping of provisions in the working alone legislation. The Federation also, as you've heard, works closely with families after such workplace tragedies. Sisters and brothers, please join me in welcoming Sister Irene Lanzinger.
Thank you, Lori. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. I want to add the voices of the 500,000 members of the BC Federation of Labour who join with you in mourning the workers who've lost their lives on the job and to honor the families that they have left behind. I think that we should also acknowledge workers who are seriously injured on the job, because that happens frequently too. And in that case, families are often left to look after workers who have had life-changing injuries for the rest of their lives. You've heard from two family members, and I want to thank them because it takes tremendous courage to tell these very, very tragic stories of loss that they've experienced. But it is so important for us to hear from them because it is a reminder of the very significant impact, incredible impact that these deaths have on families. Tragically, there are many, many families who face similar situations, who have lost family members to workplace deaths and occupational disease. On January 20th, we were devastated to hear about the explosion at the Bean Forest Products Mill in Burns Lake. 19 workers were injured in this explosion, 1 still in hospital, and 2 workers were killed. I bring you greetings from Brother Jim Sinclair. He's in Burns Lake today at a special day of mourning being held there. And then this week, the unthinkable happened when we heard of a second explosion at a mill at the Lakeland Mills in Prince George, killing 2 workers, sending 22 workers to the hospital, 5 of which are in critical condition today. 2 entire communities have been devastated by these tragedies. These deaths have a profound impact on the community. People have lost fathers, sisters, sons and daughters, neighbors, friends, coaches, people who are the heart of their community. Our hearts go out to the workers, to their families, to their friends, and to those communities. There were 186 workplace fatalities reported in 2011, up from 179 last year. Of the 186 workers that died in 2011, almost half of them died from occupational disease. 1,014 workers died across Canada in 2010, up from 939 in 2009. And these are only the fatalities whose claims are accepted by the workers' compensation boards. The statistics are shocking and are simply unacceptable to all of us. May 9th also marked the 20th anniversary since the West Ray mines that Brother Ken Giorgetti mentioned. In the past 19 years since the West Ray tragedy, approximately 17,000 people have died in Canada because of their work. It's been 9 years now since the House of Commons unanimously passed Bill C-45, the West Ray Bill, an act that amended the Criminal Code of Canada to make employers criminally accountable for workplace deaths and injuries. The West Ray Bill was a promise. It was a promise that justice would be done when employers cause deaths. And that promise has not been kept. Workers are still dying at work due to their employers' criminal negligence, and employers are not being held accountable. And in my work as a teacher, there has been this single statistic that has outlined for me so profoundly the priorities of our government. And it is a comparison between the fines levied against teachers should they stand up for their rights and the fines levied against the owners of the mushroom farm where workers tragically died. Teachers face millions of dollars in fines should they exercise their right to strike, a fundamental right in a civil society. And yet, in the mushroom fatalities, collectively, 2 companies and 3 individuals were fined $300,000, a fine that will probably never be paid. 3 people were killed, 2 very, very seriously injured. I know that many of us have heard Tracy Fan speak about her father, and yet $300,000 in fines compared to millions of dollars for teachers who go on strike. There is, for me, that single statistic so clearly outlines the skewed priorities of our government. Criminal charges were recommended against the driver and employer in the Abbotsford van tragedy that killed 3 women and injured many more, and for Weyerhaeuser for causing the death of Lyle Hewer. And yet no charges were ever laid, in spite of the incredible and sustained activism of the United Steelworkers in pursuing charges against Weyerhaeuser. The Federation has been standing alongside these families, fighting for justice and for changes required to ensure that these tragedies never happen again. You know, as a human race, we have incredible intellectual and technical capabilities. We can put a man on a moon. We can give someone a new liver, as Chuck reminded me this morning when I bumped into him. We can give someone a new heart. We have the technical and intellectual capability to solve this problem. What we do not have is the political will, and that's what we have to have. We have to elect governments that care more about people than profits. We have to elect governments that are committed to stopping these needless workplace tragedies. The Workers' Compensation Board needs to be empowered to use all of its enforcement tools, more inspectors, more orders, more and higher penalties, and we need to successfully put employers in jail when they are criminally liable for workers' death and serious injury. We have here today a cenotaph to symbolize the workers that have died, and in a moment I'm going to ask for a moment of silence, and after that moment of silence the bagpipers will play and break the moment of silence with a lament, and we'll each pick up a rose. They will lead the families and the speakers off of the stage, and we'll do a march. And after we've started, you're welcome to pick up a rose and join us, and we'll put our roses in front of the cenotaph. So I'd now like to ask you for a moment of silence to remember all of those that have lost their lives because of their work or suffered serious injury, and for the families and communities that also feel the devastating effects of these tragedies. So a moment of silence.